Thank you everyone for joining us today for what is the third session hosted by the Diversity Project. Today we're focused on working families. I'm Sasha Calasan. I am from Northern Trust and I'm co-chair of the Working Families Workstream alongside Claire Black at Principal, who's been instrumental in the setup of this session this morning. So we have a great panel today, very broad spectrum of experience and diverse perspectives, both at home and at work. So if I can invite each of you, starting with Helena, please, to give a brief intro as to why you're joining the panel today.
Hi, so I probably know many of you. I'm Helena Morrissey, Chair of the Diversity Project. I'm also the mother of 9. Some of my children are quite a lot older now than the ones that need childcare, but my youngest is 11, and at present actually we have 13 people in our household, including my 2 grandchildren aged 2 and 6 months, 5 months. And those of you who follow me on Instagram will have seen that I've had a sleepless night because my 12-year-old wasn't very well in the night. So I had good preparation for the call. It's a pleasure to be here.
Denisha, sorry, Tim.
Yeah, sure. I'm Tim Stumpf. I head up the European business for Principal Global Investors, which is a US-based asset manager. And I am the father of a 20-year-old son, an 18-year-old daughter, and a 16-year-old daughter. So kind of at the end of the physically demanding part of parenthood, not necessarily at the end of the mentally demanding part of parenthood. So happy to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Denisha Mendes. I've had about 2 decades of investment marketing and sales support experience in the investment management industry. I'm on the panel speaking mostly about being a carer for my parents. I was a full-time carer for my now late father and now a carer for my mother, who notably is in the high risk category in this crisis, and I've chosen to be locked up with her for the set 12-week period set by the government. We started in advance on day 29 with 10 weeks to go. Great to be here with you all.
And shall I go?
Yes, please.
So Claire Hodgson, I'm EMEA Director for an organisation called How Do You Do It? And we work in organisations supporting working parents, carers, and also their line managers. So over the last few weeks, I've run a virtual group coaching group with working parents, so they got their experience to draw on, but also I'm a mum of 2, mine are 8 and 10, and so I'm absolutely living the current situation we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Claire. So just to set the context before we begin, clearly this isn't working from home, this is being at home with your family in this crisis and trying to work. So there is responsibilities on all sides to try and make it work, both as an employee, a parent, your partner, your employer. But the traditional boundaries have really blurred and it's not easy, and we're all learning as we go along. So today, what we want to do is focus on what we can control and looking at it from the perspectives of each of the different roles. So the panel will discuss each question in the context of as an employee, as a parent, as a carer, and as an employer. So with that in mind, if we can move to the first question, which is focused on your role as an employee. So coming to Helena first, excuse me, we're all trying to do a full-time job whilst juggling childcare, and it's really taking its toll. As an employee, what can we do to make this situation easier for all of us?
Thanks, Sasha. Well, as you've already explained, we've all got a part to play in trying to make the best of the current situation. And one thing that often I hear, particularly in my role as chair of this project, is people are expecting a lot from their employer. And I think we should expect a lot, and we're going to come to that. But there are things we can do to help ourselves. And I think some of it is around being very clear and confident in how you communicate with your manager. I think sometimes people, what's out of sight is just out of mind, and they don't see the struggle that you might be having on a day-to-day basis or on a particular day if things have all collided together. So it's really important to be proactive and to make suggestions about what is possible, sharing your vulnerability in a confident way. So if something is really, the world's fallen in that day and you particularly can't do something, then just to be very, very open and honest about that. Agree the priorities. So again, discussing things openly with your manager is key. So you can't do everything, but you can do some things. And focusing on those priorities and making it clear that you both agree what are the priorities is another thing that you can do to help on a practical level. And then something that I have to remind myself to do, but I am now embracing it fully, is to lower your own standards a little bit. I think we are sometimes fearful of not getting everything right, not being perfect or not even close. And sometimes that means that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, including being great mom, great dad, that sort of thing, as well as obviously doing our work to our best of our ability. And I think one has to sometimes say, you know what, today, if I get to 80% of it, if I get to even 70% of it, I'll be doing a good job, and give oneself a little bit of slack. It's important for mental health, as well, obviously, as a practical juggling act that we're going through. I think one thing I'd just like to highlight, in addition to those general points, is that obviously if you're a lone parent, we're very conscious that that makes the situation extremely, intense, and it just is not physically possible or mentally possible to do a full-time job, watch over children, particularly if they're younger or need particular supervision over schoolwork, and just imagine that you can do that on a sustainable basis for what might be months. So I know of some success stories. One of my former mentees from the 30% Club mentoring schemes reached out to me and said, and she's a lone mother, single parent, has a 5-year-old son, and has told me, her boy's been great about it. And they've come to an arrangement and agreed, that she'll have a sort of message, a holding pattern, for example, on emails if she can't come to the phone or isn't available, and just be candid about that situation. If you deliver the output for your company, even if you're doing it at strange hours of the day, and when you can get to it, then you'll be safe, as a general rule anyway. I know I was going to pass to Tim for some other perspectives on this as well, because you mentioned you've got slightly older children.
Yeah, and maybe just
kind
of emphasize what Helena just said. In terms of communication, sometimes we assume that other people kind of know our situation already, and you have to realize we all kind of can sometimes get in our own bubble or kind of forget about other situations. I was on a leader team call earlier this week, and one of the members was struggling emotionally because he lost a close friend. The other people on the call, I think it really struck a chord with them. They kind of necessarily hadn't appreciated. Someone's in a different situation. Someone's in a difficult situation that I'm in. I think it helps. It can be tough, I know, to communicate things, especially if it's a communication of, maybe less than I'm on top of this, I've got it, be kind of being able to communicate a little bit of vulnerability, if you will. But I think it's so important because people will respond by and large. But you can't necessarily assume that they know what your situation is. The other thing just to emphasize is, and this kind of gets into whether I'm talking about as a role as an employee or as your role as a parent, be kind to yourself. This is an enormously difficult situation. It's a heck of a lot easier when I've got the older kids. I can't imagine rolling the clock back to 10 years ago when my kids were in the situation, or in a situation where I'm the sole care, to try to do quote unquote everything. It's not possible. Give yourself a break. Be kind to yourself. We talk about being empathetic to your coworkers and their situations. Be empathetic to yourself and just know that good enough is good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just do what you can, but give yourself a break.
So Sasha, shall we move on to the second question, or would anybody else like to add to anything that we've said?
Thanks, Tim. And now
Oh, I think
I've lost her.
Lost Sasha. Well, I'll read the next question out then. No, she's...
Oh.
Sorry, we lost you for a moment there, Sasha.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to read, Helena?
Read the question, yeah. How do I find the right balance in sharing responsibilities? Oh no, that's not me, sorry. I'm getting carried away now. What can I do as a parent to give my children the attention and direction they need whilst maintaining focus on my working day? Now, this one obviously is related to the first question, but just in terms of some of the very specifics around those twin full-time roles, really, of looking after children and working full-time, if that's your normal situation. And I guess to echo Tim's point just now, the starting point has to be to manage your own self and self-care, and to, as in his words, be kind to yourself. So don't feel guilty, don't feel now is the time to suddenly create masterpieces with your children and to be that perfect parent that is, you know, monitoring and helping with homeschooling and suddenly become a full-time teacher as well. I think we can help if it obviously very much depends on what age your children are, and this doesn't apply if your children are very young. But if they're, for example, doing homeschooling, which I think for everybody now is stopped for the Easter holidays, but we've kind of got a taste of what might be to come in the summer term, then it's important to try and get some boundaries around your shared life and the shared time that you can spend together. So, for example, exercising together. You know, we could stop and all do, or start the day with the Joe Wicks thing, or we can all do, which I've been doing with my 11-year-old. She's a lot better at it than me, I have to say, but it kind of bonds us. And then when she has to do her thing by herself, because I have to be on a call and she needs a little bit of supervision and help, I don't feel that much time passes, or that it's completely that she's on her own. So it's not the same as having a teacher by her all the time, but to echo Tim's word, it's good enough. Then obviously having times together during the day, for example, or breaking for lunch. And we're trying to encourage employers, going back to what, you know, different parties can do to help things here, to set some boundaries around, again, being proactively conscious of their employees' days and avoiding, for example, meetings between 12 and 2 o'clock, so that people can talk about what's going on, even if in the short term they've had to be separated. We found in our family, and there are obviously too many people for peaceful working side by side, but there are certain spaces in the house where we have developed, you know, this is a shared table. Everyone can work here if there's a seat available, but it's not a talking situation here. Here we're respecting each other's, you know, time to be silent. If I need to help my younger children with some work, or I need to do a video call, we go into a separate space. And obviously not everybody's house is perfectly set up for working from home and also doing the schoolwork. But by creating spaces where that's designated as your workspace or your home space, you just help to create this rhythm and routine. There is also the suggestion, this is tying into that we're all kind of going to be advertising, letting things go, really, letting ourselves go. We're not saying that, but, you know, give again yourself a bit of slack. You may have a real antipathy to your children, you know, watching a video on the screen, monitor their screen time very particularly normally. This is not the time to set yourself great standards on that. If you need to have a couple of hours of peace, or an hour, say, then watching a movie that they've always wanted to watch, that you're to some extent controlling the content, is really not going to do anybody any harm. And actually we might all start to relax a little bit into this, because children are anxious about it too. And again, depending on their age, I've noticed that certainly some of my teenage children are very anxious about the situation. And last but not least, before I hand over, I would also suggest that very much, if you have a partner, have that conversation about sharing the load, because obviously otherwise it is impossible. I was going to pass over to Claire now to add from a more professional point of view.
Well, no, I think
from the heart what I'm actually doing day to day.
Well, no, and I think this is a situation where, you know, this is unusual and unique, and so we are all working it out day to day. The only bits I would add is to get really conscious of the choices we are making at this time. So really being aware of the small decisions that we are making every day around how we're managing home, because it could be easy, and this comes to the question around sharing the unpaid domestics of our life. It could be easy to fall into traditional gender patterns around some of that. The Office of National Statistics data still shows, I'm afraid, that women can pick up the mother load at home, and this could be a time where we fall into that if we don't have clear negotiation with other halves at home where they're part of our mix. So really making conscious choices and framing things in that way in our minds as we do day to day in terms of going through. Another thing I read this over the last few days, the teaching unions, and it really stuck with me. The teaching unions issued some guidance last week, and as they said, it's not business as usual for neither schools nor parents, neither is it business as usual for us as employees. And their guidance was that we should, if we're in the world of homeschooling, we should be thinking about 3 hours a day as a maximum. Now, I'll be honest, that's not where I went into as a working parent. When school suddenly came home, I'm suddenly thinking I need to replicate the school day entirely. So to that point of, let's be kind on ourselves. This isn't a normal situation, and we need to consider carefully how the sort of beliefs we put around what should be happening, what is truly important in this situation that we look after, and make sure we're focused on that in our choices, and not limiting ourselves in other ways around the beliefs we might carry about what should be happening.
Maybe if I,
go on, Tim.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go for it.
I was just going to tag on to the conscious decisions, and I guess from the perspective of, my children, they're temporarily back in the house, but they're kind of moved on, in terms of the day-to-day life at their age, going on to uni and everything. From a conscious decision, think about 10 years from now, and your children, if your child right now is 6, or think about it from 10 years, 15 years from now. You're going to look back. Are you going to think about, I spent another 5 minutes on that PowerPoint presentation, or think about how you want to be thinking about it on a look back. I can tell you right now, I couldn't tell you, and I don't care how a presentation went 10 years ago. I can tell you exactly what I did with my children when they were 6 and 7 and 8 years old. Those are the things that stick now. So as a way to kind of think about a conscious decision, kind of think about how you're going to look back, because you will look back. Trust me, when your kids get to this age.
And then thank you, Tim. And I was going to say a little bit more about finding the balance in sharing the unpaid domestics, if I put it that way. And as I've already alluded to, it's a critical element, but one that can be often forgotten. And in a world actually where, we may have made the choice in the past to outsource some things, have help with the cleaning as an example, that's no longer available. So all of a sudden we're going to have to think very consciously about how we're splitting the load between maybe 2 of us in the house, or whoever is there to help. And I do think kids can play a role. Mine, it turns out, love hoovering and washing the kitchen floor. But actually spending some time, they're 8 and 10. That's but spending some time sitting down and thinking about, right, what is on the list that absolutely has to get done for us as a family in the unpaid side of our lives, and how do we split that out, and having clear responsibilities around it. And there might be some acceptance in that I might not do it in the same way that you do, but if you're responsible for it, I'm letting you take that lead, and I'm not going to interfere if that's not done in my normal expectations or how I would like it. So really being conscious about those decisions as well, because that absolutely is about dividing our time between us, bearing as individuals, to support our families.
Thank you. And so, Denisha, just bringing you into the discussion now. I know you have a situation supporting your elderly mother. Do you have a perspective on how we can best support high-risk parents when we can't physically be with them? Do you have some suggestions?
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually written up some notes which I wanted to refer to, but before I start on about that, I wanted to sort of share that as an industry, we have a tremendous learning opportunity to educate ourselves on how to support our colleagues who are caring for their elderly parents. I found that I've spent the last few years doing a lot of education work, not just with my line managers and the department heads, but also human resources. When I was caring for my father with dementia, I was always told I should just find care for him and put him in a care home. And, you're having very strange discussions. And at some point I even had to take time out without any income to care for him full time. And it also meant that there was no awareness around the sleepless nights I had, the diapers I was changing, so just to sort of share, we have a lot to learn and a long way to go with this. In terms of this actual situation, and where a lot of people who will be able to share the sentiment that their vulnerable parents will be in high risk isolation if they're over the age of 70. I think there's sort of five angles I've had to sort of approach in the last month, but more primarily in the first 2 weeks as we began our lockdown. The first was food supply, there's technology, there's the medical logistics if there's prescription medication, there's household security, how to keep the house safe and functioning, and also my mother's mental health. And you know, I mean, just to show, you know, I'm physically not leaving the house except for a very quick walk at dawn around 5 o'clock. But for people who are caring from the outside, so they're not able to access their parents, in terms of the first point for food supply, if you're struggling to get supermarket slots, like most of us are, there's actually plenty of small businesses in your parents' neighborhood that you can work with. That's what I'm doing now, who will, if you tell them your situation, who will deliver. There's also an app called Nextdoor, a neighborhood app that I've registered on. There's where volunteers have registered in your neighborhood to come and help you. So I'm now working with 3 volunteers and 3 delivery businesses to get, you know, for 1 week I have 6 different deliveries, usually from medicine to food. Then there's the technology side of things. So this is things like making sure your parents have, you know, their TV and radio set up. Have they got a smartphone and an iPad? There's things like Facebook Portal, which you can, you know, even put through the mailbox and help them stay connected to you. And also there's an app called Ring for the doorbell, where they can sort of even see a little screen of who's standing outside. So these are some of the other options in terms of technology. And there's a lot of coaching you can do on the phone to make sure that they are connected. I've been helping my mother's friends and also through their children, making sure that they know which button to press on the video, and it has such a great impact for them to be able to see their friends. We take it for granted in terms of video communication, but for them it's a big thing. For medical logistics, my mother is on 18 different prescription medication, just to highlight how vulnerable she is. Of course, you have to inform your GP. There's all kinds of systems that our brilliant NHS, of course, has set up. But you know, letting them know. I rung the pharmacy, the local pharmacy, negotiated delivery slots, or you can also work with your volunteers to ease the burden on the pharmacy. You can set up things like there's the Babylon Health app for video consultations if your parents are able to. If they're sort of kind of smart enough with their smartphones. And then I have things like something I call household security, which is just making sure, especially when you're not in the building with them, is their bathroom slip proof? You know, is the bathtub, has it got like a rubber thing? How is the rubbish being removed from the house? Looking at the fire alarm, fire hazards, have they got things like light bulbs? Is there drain unclogging gel? I even though I'm in the building with her, I've written out little procedures for my mum on how to like use the remote control with the other remote control. And also this one is a little bit bizarre, but I actually prepared, if there's an emergency, if someone actually does need to enter the building, I managed to find on Amazon, they're not clinical standard, but I got a hazmat suit and face masks and gloves and shoe covers, so that if for whatever reason, if there's a leak or something and someone needs to enter the building where your parents are, you're able to just, you know, put these people into this and find a safer way of them accessing the building. The last point is mental health, which is of course a big thing, and the number one thing, of course, is social interaction. We found ways for my sister to come and sit outside the window and talk to my mum. It means cleaning the window. There's things like making sure they don't, you know, encourage them not to watch too much news, because it can cause a lot of anxiety, especially in their age group. It's even curating a little bit of the content that they're taking in. You're like, oh mum, there's a nice program on quilting. You know, there's a nice, you know, Jamie Oliver's on, why don't you watch that? It's coming up with, it's giving sort of surprise little luxuries, such as flowers or chocolates or baked goods. Croissants is a big thing. Making sure they have enough reading material. Our parents are probably of the newspaper hard copy generation, helping out with that. And then the last thing, if you're lucky enough, as we are, to have some outside space, is optimizing that in the best possible way with nice pot plants, or, you know, helping make sure that the sunny corner, that there's a chair. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And now switching up to the employer's perspective, how should employers be helping those with working families in the current environment? Any practical suggestions in terms of what they could do, but also what advice can you give employees about staying visible at the same time when they're juggling? So two angles to the question. Tim, would you like to take the lead on that?
Yeah, it's a few things. I guess probably the overriding thing from an employer, and I can walk through a few different specifics, but the overriding thing is empathy. You gotta be able to practice and show empathy, whether it's called servant leadership, however you want to call it. You know, I send out daily emails to our entire team here in Europe, and we do weekly calls. And over and over and over again, I'm sure people are sick of hearing about it, just talking about patience, tolerance, and flexibility with your coworkers. Flexible work used to, you know, 2 months ago, we talked to, you know, it was probably thought of, well, on Mondays, I'm going to work from home and Fridays I'll work from home. It's now flexibility during the day. You know, someone may grab 2 hours here and then be off for 3 hours, and they may grab another 2 hours of work at a different stretch and then another 2 hours. Those are things we've been encouraging and stressing over and over and over again, that your coworkers and people you're working with need to be flexible and patient and tolerant with people who do need to kind of shift on and off, and you know, and it may be a change from day to day. Tuesday may be a difficult day with your children or with the people you're caring for, so you may not get a response back from somebody on a Tuesday. That's okay, and I think those messages from the employer has to be emphasizing that over and over and over again, and we have to practice it with you know, with coworkers as well as, you know, the teams we lead. Connected to that, and I think also in terms of, you know, maintaining visibility, another thing is just it's hard to overemphasize, and it's a, you know, a bit of a cliche, connectivity and communication. Kind of at the start of this, I couldn't formally require it, but we strongly encouraged everybody to, for example, join at least 2 work-driven kind of WhatsApp chat groups. It doesn't have to be about work. It wasn't even supposed to be about work. It's supposed to be kind of social connectivity, you know, whether it be a location-driven group or a functionality-driven group. But then also, you know, regular team meetings, team groups, and also one-on-one calls. Because to your point about, you know, we talk about flexibility. If you have a scheduled team call every day at, I don't know, 10 o'clock, somebody's not going to be able to join that. You don't want them to be kind of lost out. So either shifting up the times occasionally, and just doing a lot of one-on-one touch bases. We also have been using the Microsoft Teams application quite a bit for work-related chat. Some of it is, you know, parenting tips. Some of it is just sharing pictures. Some of it is, you know, IT help. But it's hard to overemphasize just staying connected in both directions, from the employer and the employee perspective, from the manager and your line team as well.
So if I could just add as well, Tim, you made some brilliant points, and obviously you're doing a great job yourself as a leader of a business here. And what the Diversity Project is going to be doing is collating some examples of the really kind of high standards that some employers are putting in place around this issue. We know there are headline stories like Goldman Sachs offering their worldwide 36,000 employees an extra 10 days family leave during this period. That might not be affordable for every business, but we're putting together the sort of big stories and the more sort of the human side of it that can really transform the experience from an employee's point of view and make all the difference for well-being. The human touch, you know, how to as I've used the word before, but proactively ask people so that you can develop empathy with their situation. So these calls are being accompanied by sort of some guidance for employers, employees, tips, might be a bit of a superficial way of putting it, but what we are keen to hear from anybody on this call or further is any examples that you would like to share. It can be anonymized, but these are good news stories, so you might not want to, of things that are really working through this crisis. I'll share one that came up that some of you might have heard if you joined last week's call, when we were talking about working from home or working at home in a crisis. And one firm had realized, because they got the feedback, that people were missing the social interaction. So they instigated a Friday virtual drinks gathering on Zoom, where people would sit at home with their own glass of wine or beer or whatever it was, chat, close out the week. And apparently it's really been very transformational. So they can be stories like that, but very keen to hear from people. So that's an ask, but the Diversity Project will publish and be a resource for that sort of example.
Can I just add to the conversation, just some for those of you with line management responsibility, because I think there are things obviously we can do. Our organisation needs to do some things. So our organisation need to set the tone on giving us permission for it to be okay, and to do all those things to allow us to care for ourselves and raise the conversation. As line managers, there's a lot we can do as well, and that's on our calls. Talking about what do we need to achieve at a team, and where are our limitations as a team, because it might not just be the working parents, others may have some things that they're needing to do as well, and how do we achieve the output we need to as a team. And it might be buddying people up in the team to support each other. It might be just be really recognizing that it's a discussion held at that level save some time on the individual basis. And that's not to say we don't do the individual ones as well, but the more we can air it as a team, then I think the more comfortable people will feel raising it. And also deal with potentially, I have heard examples of where there might be some begrudging of, you know, well, the working parents, well, so it's not easy for us, you know, what they're getting a bit more time permission because of the other things they've got on. So if we start to air these things at a team level, it can just nip some of that stuff in the bud.
Thanks, Claire. So finally, as we look to wrap up our panel session today, I'd like to end on a positive note and think about what the future might look like, what learning points, what positive points we can take from what's been happening, and how we can incorporate that to change working practices going forward for the better. Tim, if I can come to you first.
Yeah, I think a silver lining in this, and it's a human tragedy, the coronavirus situation, but a silver lining from this perspective is the acceptance of flexible working and remote working and you know, arranging schedules. This is jumping us light years forward, just leaps and bounds, probably 10 years faster than we would have otherwise. There's so many people in our office here and in other offices across the world who have been holdouts on this situation, and I really don't want my team to do this, or I'm really reluctant to this. A lot of presenteeism that is quickly and irreversibly, I think, going out the window. So I think it's going to make these situations and issues so much easier and so much better. And the issue of maintaining visibility, we're all figuring out how to maintain visibility now, and we're all scattered to the winds. I just think this is really going to be helpful from that perspective. So as a positive, it's not completely a negative situation here.
Denisha, any perspective from you? Are you on mute, Denisha?
Yes, I was actually, I was listening to a talk yesterday, a webinar by the London Business School, and it's Professor Linda, I want to say Grafton, who stated that, quite frankly, this is the most exciting moment for a workforce, and that things will never, ever, ever go back to the way we were. I'm also the marketing lead on the Smart Working workstream for the Diversity Project. And I had to say, when all this happened, I really had to I was taken aback with all the content we had been preparing and videos and so on, because I realized, oh dear, all that seems almost outdated now, because the conversation has so radically changed. So, just echoing Tim, yes, this is a tremendous human tragedy. We are in the midst of a long-term mental health, do I want to say crisis? People will experience different levels of trauma. Their relationships are strained. We know from what's happening to the charity helplines, domestic abuse, child abuse, all these things are happening. However, as a workforce, I think the conversation will be changed very, very radically, as in particular more senior levels of management that have traditionally been more reluctant to use technology have now become more fluent in these things, and I think are really learning what trust is, that, you know, we have to trust until people are proven untrustworthy, and that you are able to deliver to your clients' standards even without people sitting next to you. So yeah.
Thanks. Claire, coming to you.
I've got 3 things, if that's allowed. So one, I think it's going to show, and there'll be greater acceptance of the men's roles in parenting, and that being something that's not assumed, still not everywhere, to be a woman's role. So I think that. Secondly, what I'm loving is that we're seeing more of the human side of ourselves at work, and actually sharing some vulnerability. And I've got to know people in a slightly different way, even over these 4 weeks. And I think that's a great thing, that we're not superhuman in all worlds, that we can have a bit of just us as normal people in a situation. And the third thing is, actually, my children are understanding much more about my work. And I really like that they, at the end of every day, they've been asking me how it's been. We've been doing a daily check-in as a family. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your day been like? And we've all been part of that. And that's to help us all be able to say, do you know what, today's not been easy, or today's been great, and what's made it great, or what's made it hard, and us understanding each other. And that is valuable time that I wouldn't have necessarily, off traveling for work and doing all of that, I wouldn't have necessarily had that time each day. So I'm really appreciating, and I think that's the case in many families.
Anna, coming to you.
So, of course, some fantastic points have already been made. So in some ways, I just want to emphasize the ones that I think are key. Everyone's talked really about the game-changing nature of the giant remote working experiment that we're all being on at present. And I think it genuinely, I hope that we haven't really talked about this so much, but that it'll change the mindset away from sort of hours worked and a very traditional mindset, I think, in our particular industry, to much more around output. And that is going to help equalize men and women's lives as well. I think that Claire raised a very important point, that we need to be on our guard against the duties of working families falling on the mother during this period. And we will be having a call in a couple of weeks on the gender-related issues around the coronavirus. One of these sessions will be devoted to that. So I think if there are people who've got some things they'd like to share on that, or questions they'd like to ask, please come forward on that. I'd like to also echo the points that have been made about exposing our humanity and getting to know our colleagues better. I think everyone's guard is down a little bit, and that's no bad thing for particularly for building a stronger, more successful. I mean, in all honesty, in commercial terms, we need to be more human. We need to be more honest and open, and more just connected with everybody that we serve, and our co-workers. So I think that's been a great blessing, or will be in the end. And finally, but very much not the least important, and Tim touched on this when you said about, when you look back at this time, the time you might have spent, for example, as a family, with your partner, reassessing the balance of your own life. I mean, that hopefully will enable us to rebalance. I think we've all realized that actually a lot of our busyness before was, not entirely self-created, but we've kind of we got faster and faster in the pace of life. And I think it's this, now we have a very unusual moment to spend time with our family, to just hang out, have family meal times, play silly games, watch movies together, and learn how to work in a different way. So it's not the way one would have liked these things to have happened, but we should take those positives. And the Diversity Project will try, this is not an advert, but it's more, we'll try to emphasize a lot of these learnings as we go forward, because it would be another tragedy if we were all so desperate to get back to normal that we forget all of this.
Agreed.
Agree.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry.
mention as well, I mean, I'll leave it to you to close out the core session, but just to mention to everybody, the next week we will be going back to the mental health issues. We've touched on that a little bit today, but it's clearly a very high priority for everybody. And then the week after, we'll be focused on the gender, well, perhaps I've missed out a week now, but anyway, we have a series being coming up, and everybody who's on the steering committee of the diversity project is getting the updated calendar as it unfolds, and then we'll make sure that everybody gets invited to these calls. Please do pass them on as well to other people in your organization. These are supposed to be helpful for all employees of our member firms, and we will change the technology if we run out of space on the lines.
Thank you, Helena, and a huge thank you to all our panelists. There's been messages throughout about really nice feedback from what the points and perspectives you've been sharing, so thank you for that. The call has been recorded, so it will be shared with all of your organisations, so feel free to share it within those organisations. We will also take follow-up questions, so if anyone has any follow-up questions, we will take them and come up with both an FAQ, and if there's enough demand, perhaps we can find a slot later on in the calendar to have a follow-up session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye now.
Bye.